And welcome to Hagman. Did I do something wrong here? No, okay. I had to double check to make sure I was on. Welcome to Hagman. It's the Hagman Report, where truth can't be silenced. And I am so fortunate to have with me, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most distinguished gentlemen walking the planet today. He's got. If I read his entire bio, we'd still be here tomorrow. I've met this gentleman. I'm not sure he remembers me. I met him in Florida a number of years ago, and you talk about one of the most intelligent people that I've met. It's Mr. Gary Stearman. Now, I want to bring something up here because for his and folks, Gary Stearman, prophecywatchers.com, and you can find his bio at prophecywatchers.com/Gary Stearman. But in fact, the link will be in the program description box. But listen to this, okay? Listen to this. I grew up in the world of flight, aircraft design, and an airport culture, okay? From childhood, my expectation was that I would study engineering, which he later did, by the way, and learn to fly. And during his youth, the world included being in the company of men who operated government research and development programs, some of which were highly classified. Oh, yes, folks, there are those out there. And in their conversations, they also spoke of having experienced the reality of mysterious aerial phenomena. UFOs, aliens, strange craft, supernatural, natural. He wondered, he said. Okay, now, while in engineering school, he felt called to try his skills as a writer, so he added studies in linguistics, language, including, I will say, Greek and literary analysis. Oh, how important that is. I opened the show today talking about language, but I digress. There, he said, he honed his research skills that would later take him into the deeper studies of Scripture. And this is where the two things kind of mesh together. And though he had not been raised in the gospel and at that point had never received Christ. So that's kind of the backdrop in which we find ourselves. And again, we're talking with Gary Stearman, prophecywatchers.com. And here to take this forward from here, because folks, in under 40 days, there's going to be a conference in Branson. And my commitment to you, the viewer and listener, to bring people on through Steve that are going to be the keynote speakers there, the speakers there to talk about things like this in greater detail, but at least you get a taste. You get some sense of what the information is going to be. I don't want to drag this on too much any further, actually. So with me, I have, again, the very distinguished Mr. Gary Stearman and the additionally very distinguished, not extinguished, but distinguished Steve Quayle. So, Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you. Please, my man, take this and let's talk. Steve?
Well, fortunately, people are going to have the treat because I've been interviewed by Gary so many times, and I think this is probably the first time we, Doug, get to actually share with him, share with the listening audience the vast knowledge and research that Gary has dove into, and let's just say saturated himself with. And so it's a treat. Gary will be the keynote speaker Saturday night at Branson, Missouri, the 13th through the 15th of September. We've got a couple hundred spots open for people to register to come and hear all the great speakers in person. But where Gary brings to the table, not only being the oldest and wisest, and I told him, I don't tease him. I said, man, I wish I look as good as you do at your age as I do at 60, as I look not good at 68. The bottom line is that there's no one closer to the reverse engineering, his family. I'll let him tell the story. And I've asked Gary to share with you some tidbits. One of the most amazing stories is going to tell about a UFO incident that most people don't even recognize. And, he's privy to the information on it. So, Gary, hey, thank you. What a treat it is for me to have you. And thank you so much. And Bob Ulrich for your just amazing cordiality when I was with you guys in, Oklahoma. And also the fantastic talk we had. Doug, I mean, Gary and I could talk for hours and hours and hours. And I don't believe that's an embellishment. Is it, Gary? Go ahead, sir.
No, and by the way, with Steve, it's always hard to get a word in edgewise, but I managed to do it anyway. And it's a pleasure to be here. I think it's time for the Christian family to wake up. And I know you do too. And what do they need to wake up to? Well, they need to wake up to what their Bible actually says about dimensionality, hyperdimensionality, strange creatures who fly around the earth, who actually are capable of interdimensional travel. And I'm speaking, of course, of demons, devils, the devil himself. And we've kind of mythologized him, and we've turned him into a paper tiger. But he roams the earth. He's called the Prince of the Power of the Air. He appears, and his cohorts appear in the night sky, and everybody says, "Oh, look, it's a UFO." Well, years ago, too many years ago to count, that explanation simply did not ring true with me. And the church in which I was raised didn't answer the questions I was asking. I once asked, why don't we see angels anymore? And I was told, well, Gary, and this is when I was a teenager, I suppose. Gary, they don't appear anymore. They're real, but God has a different plan, and so forth and so on. And yet, in common reading, in common conversation, the subject of supernatural beings came up over and over again in my early life. And I knew there had to be an explanation. The explanation, of course, for what is commonly called UFOs is a war that's continuing in the heavens as we speak. And we see the, if you will, the shrapnel, the broken parts and pieces. And I'm thinking, for example, of that pasture down in Texas. Or over in New Mexico, there's another pasture. This one I'm speaking of is north of Dallas. And there's another pasture over near Roswell where all kinds of parts and pieces were found. And what could those have to do with angels and demons? Well, everything, as you know, Steve. And so this is kind of what drives me is to merge the gospel and the truth of the Bible and Bible prophecy with scientism and pseudoscientism as people try to either explain or explain away UFO phenomena.
Well, and I think that you nailed it. And this is something that we're trying, Gary. You're trying at Prophecy Watchers. I'm trying. We're all trying who are dealing with these subjects as authors, researchers, to get the Christians ready for the greatest deception in the history of the world that's now coming forth, even from the military that denied all of the UFO findings for all these years. So if you would be so kind, share. The first question I want to have for you before we go into anything is your opinion of the Navy's footage, all of the, everything's breaking now. Even the head of NASA about close to 6-8 months ago made the statement they're going to find life on Mars. And he's not talking about microbial life, but will you share, please, at this point, the rush to disclose and as it applies to the end times, because they want to get their dialogue out, and what you and I and others are doing, all the researchers that we basically, you interview, I interview, or we talk together, we're trying to beat them to the punch, and that's for the sake of the mental health and the total salvation, too, of Christians that have lived in denial or will be destroyed. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, as you know, the expectation in the heart of the average 30-year-old today has been very carefully conditioned through movies, books, cultural exchanges, texting, and Skyping. The mythology has grown and grown and grown. And Hollywood is cranking out movie after movie to explain to us where all these strange creatures have come from. And and I know that's a false myth. And so where do we start? I go back to my early childhood and teenage years when I literally grew up around a family of aeronautical engineers who worked with aircraft companies like Beech and Cessna and Boeing. and Stearman Aircraft Products, which, by the way, still exists to this very day, began life back in the 30s with the old biplanes. And believe me, engineers are no-nonsense people. And I've known lots and lots of aeronautical engineers. And if you listen to them long enough, they start to exchange stories. They start to say, oh, you know what? I heard something about an encounter a pilot had with something that nobody understands. And then the next story comes, and the next, and the next. And I've told you, Steve, that the dinner table conversation around the Stearman table was really interesting when I was growing up. And as an early teenager and mid-teenager, I began hearing stories about one in particular, crashed UFOs. And I'm not talking about Roswell. Roswell had already happened, and everybody had mythologized it to some degree at that point in time. But then, again, around the old Stearman dinner table, there was talk of another crash in Colorado. This one, even more spectacular than the one in Lubbock, or not Lubbock, but Roswell. And I can provide a lot of detail, and will at the conference, of what they found at the Colorado UFO crash, which, by the way, nobody's ever read about that I know of. But I have seen and heard and talked with the actual participants in the exploration team that went in and looked at the crash. So that's one thing I'll be talking about.
Well, I think, too, we'll just wet their whistle. The viewers to Hagmann's report right now, Doug's report, is that it was an alien craft. There were alien bodies. The area was secured. And it's one of the most astonishing stories. Why do you think that one is just in the background? And maybe it's because of God's timing through you that it's brought out. But that makes Roswell look like a chicken feed. And look at the whole world that's grown up around Roswell. And I think the other things that you're going to be talking about, ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to blow my mind. But the nice thing about being around Mr. Stearman is that he succeeds. And I want you to understand something. I'm starting to grin because I know the rest of the story, but some of the stuff he'll be sharing is mind-boggling. So that's enough to wet their whistle. But I also want you, if you would, to discuss because of your family's, obviously, Stearman Aviation, the reverse engineering, and some of the things that you'll be speaking about from a perspective of someone who's totally in the aeronautics world, but also that as engineers, I have a son who's an engineer, and engineers are engineers. They deal with facts, numbers, formulas, everything. And the bottom line is that those guys aren't given to soliloquy or expectation or long philosophical dissertation. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, hard rocks, nuts and bolts, and just the facts, and that's what they're interested in. You ask a question, why was this particular event not publicized like the Roswell event was? And I think the answer is this was about 5-6 years after Roswell, and I think by this time they had perfected their cleanup. They had anticipated something like this happening again, and when it happened, they were ready, and nobody ever heard a thing about it. And I know very little about it, but I do know enough to share, and it does add to the broad picture of what's going on. I guess here's a question, Steve, and you've dealt with this, I've dealt with it. These little guys are masquerading as space aliens who came from, who knows, Epsilon Eridani, or some exotic star system far, far away. And yet you and I both know that they don't come from some star system far, far away. They're interdimensional. They're spoken of in the Bible as angels and demons, and they're constantly working at some task or other to try to befuddle the plan of God. And if you go back to Greco-Roman history, the Greeks spoke very, very much at length concerning the work that these little guys were doing. And it's astonishing if you go back, for example, and read the histories of Hesiod. He describes what we would call UFO aliens in great detail. And he says, hey, the demons are our friends. and we should play up to them and develop a relationship with them, and they will bless us if we do. And so you can go back as far as you want. You can go back to Abraham and his battle in Genesis 14 with the four kings when the giants show up, and there's a tremendous, I would call it a world war that was waged at that time. And when the giants show up for the battle and other elements that we would call supernatural show up in the battle scene, we're looking at exactly the same thing in the life of Abraham as we were looking at in 1947 and in 1954 and on and on and on. Creatures that used to be called mythical are now being spoken of as space travelers, visitors.
And this is something that's critical, and this is why Branson is so important. Gary, you and I, even on your show, that you know, thank you for having me on, but we talked about there's certain content that can only be revealed as the context of time will frame it, because you mentioned all the things, everything from video games, Hollywood, every form of technology, mind control, subliminal thoughts being placed in. But given the fact that mythology, that as King Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun, for that which will be, has already been. So
yes.
As someone who studies a lot of mythology, legends, and it's just like the little creatures, when I wrote the book, Little Creatures, it was because even when we're in the Solomon Islands, I didn't go there, a film team went there, and we go to Hawaii, the Menehune, we go to Thailand, the Nari Ponds, they're talking about little creatures. But you know what's interesting? One of the quotes that I found is they literally declare themselves to be the spawn of the fallen one. The spawn of the fallen one. So the fact that, these little gray demons, and I tell people, do you really think those entities that are supernaturally evil are gods, are creators, when they come here and fool around with the human reproductive system, and they're always abducting, or they're probing, or they're extracting, or false memories? And now we know that not only false memories, but they can erase memories, just like the Men in Black. And so what's interesting, Gary, is that the timing of Branson could not be more, I would say this, divine. That's not because we're throwing it on, I'm throwing it on, and we all collectively are speaking. It's because when Jesus said, Satan, get thee behind me, that means follow after me. So it's interesting, concurrent with the Branson coming up and all of the revelation coming to the different speakers, and not all of them, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, are Christians, but they're the key researchers in the world. So to dismiss men or women who are not Christians, but they're some of the brightest people in the world, and they have real life encounters, you basically cut yourself off from sources. So Gary, again, share a little bit more what you're going to talk about at Branson, because you give, I would say this, of anybody I know, this is not flattery, if anybody I know, you have the best start to finish, I would say, bracket from beginning to end, especially as it relates to aliens, fallen angels. And I think people lose track. Fallen angels, these aren't cavemen, or they're not cherubs that sit on the mantelpiece. And that even prehistory, prior to the creation of Adam and Eve. So if you want to even touch on a little bit of the pre-Adamic world, because I find there's so much war in, quote, professing Christendom, they will not embrace that thought.
Well, first of all, I just want to ask everybody a question, and this is the question I think every Christian should ask him or herself, and that is, do angels have technology? Simple question, but believe me, it's an important question, because we've all been raised, and I think the church has been reared to suppress anything that suggests that God has any sort of technology, that his cherubs, that his seraphs, that the angels on high, the throne guardians, the guardians of the various regions of heaven and earth, they do what they do by, I guess, what we might call higher knowledge, or maybe magic. But I ask the question again, do angels have technology? And I believe with all my heart that yes, angels have incredible technology. And if you know how to read the Bible, and if you know how to watch what the angels are doing, and I'm talking about the good guys, the angels that did not rebel, the way they behave is very logically, rationally, if you will, technologically. They go about in chariots. Well, what's a chariot? I don't know what an angelic chariot would look like, except maybe I do, and maybe I'm going to share that at your meeting in September, because I think I have great insight into what those chariots of the angelic realm look like, and believe me, they are high tech beyond your wildest dreams. Well, if the good angels have technology, what about the bad angels? Do they have technology? And there we come to an excellent question, because the guys in Roswell, the guys that crashed in Colorado that I'm going to tell about, they had an incredible technology, which, by the way, has been somewhat pirated by a number of research labs in the years since 1948. And we're talking about all the major research labs, IBM and Bell Labs, Lockheed in California, which, by the way, has the Skunk Works. And where do you suppose they got all their good ideas? So,
Yeah.
This to me is the center of the story, and it brings the Bible into the 21st century. The Bible is not some archaic, crinkly old book that you just read on Sunday. The Bible is the handbook and the guide for planet Earth.
And I think that the technology issue is really important. One of the things that I believe that, and I was told this by multiple witnesses, multiple from intelligence people, guys who want to clear their hearts, clear their conscience, and they come to Jesus, and they want people to know. But the special operations world of every major country is looking for the ancient technology. They're looking for the ancient math. They're looking for the secret, if you will, arcane, occult, and hidden secrets. And that's what the mystery schools are all about. And we know from the book of Revelation that Satan is going to utilize that technology to deceive, to seduce, and destroy. And that's why it's so important that people do understand that they do have technology. And it's even, you know this, in reading the, if you will, the Golden Age mythology. Atlantis was destroyed when they started tampering with the human genome and mixing it with animals. And now we got CRISPR technology, and we got all these things. And technology cannot save people any more than a political process will. But, share some of the fascinating ancient technology, if you want to just touch on it, because we got to cover a lot of stuff in an hour.
Well, in the analogs of Plato, there are a number of references to ancient technology. One of them is he talks about the ancient city of Atlantis, which had a lighting system. And he mentions that it operated on some form of copper alloy. And the copper alloy that, no one really knows what the alloy was. He refers to it in the Greek as he's talking about Atlantis, but he's very clearly talking about a city that is powered by some kind of technology. Well, who built the city? Well, according to Plato, Atlas built the city. He was one of the fallen ones who came down from the heavens. He took an earthly wife, and he immediately began to build a circular city, which is it was a series of concentric rings, apparently somewhere on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea, or what we call the Mediterranean Sea right now. And boats came and went into the city of Atlantis, and Atlas was the ruler of Atlantis, and it was a high-tech city. Well, where did Atlas come from? He was fathered through an earth woman by the god Poseidon. At least that's what is told to us by a very reliable writer by the name of Plato. And he tells it as though it's the true story. He's not making up a story. He's just saying, listen, this is what used to happen. And although we have forgotten much of many of the features that made Atlantis work, I can tell you about a few of them. And of course, the one that intrigues me is this copper alloy they had in Atlantis that generated some form of energy that was able to light up the city. And I find things like that amazingly interesting.
Well, the other thing Atlantis was known for was basically its death rays, harnessing the sun's rays. And obviously you're talking about lighting up. Well, I would say this, the other names for Atlantis vary, and there are other, ancient antediluvian civilizations. But what was interesting about Atlantis is the same style of that, the way the city is laid out, interestingly enough, is in Gath. When they found Gath, the city of Goliath, in the background, did you see the layout of that circular area? I think it's in Israel too, but I forget the name of it. But what's interesting, if you look at that, it's almost a blueprint for Atlantis. So, and the Basque in Spain consider themselves to be the descendants of the Atlanteans.
Yeah, you're talking about Gilgal Rephaim in northern Israel.
Yes, sir.
And you're right. It's shaped after the fashion of Atlantis. And the word Rephaim, of course, is used in the Old Testament many, many, many times, usually translated as angels, or fallen ones, or those residing in Hades waiting for judgment. But we know the Rephaim as giants. For example, Goliath of Gath was one of the Rephaim, and he had special features. A lot of people say they have a special level of intelligence that was higher than humankind, as well as being super strong and living extra long lives. But they're called the Rephaim, and the Old Testament is absolutely full of them, and they are always connected with megalithic structure, which, by the way, and you know this as well as I, if not better, megalithic structure could not be built by men today with their current technology, right?
It could not, especially like the stone of the pregnant woman in Baalbek, all of the antediluvian pre-flood structures. They defy even logic in the consequential sense. Some people say, well, they just poured it. They had a form of concrete and poured it in place. Well, then how do you account for the seams? You don't need those seams. And they're so irregularly shaped, that just doesn't make sense. But again, what's interesting, the Cyclops of Greek mythology were called belly hands, and they're attributed to the guys that created a lot of the underground tunnel systems. And all of the myths and legends about many of the islands in the Mediterranean are just filled with legendary, mythological. And here's the deal. The DNA extraction and looking for those things, these entities out there, they have to use mankind to open up the gates of hell, because God gave mankind prior to the fall dominion. So they use deception to get men to yield their place in God and their authority to make actually war on God's kids, his children. So, and even going back to the Vimanas of ancient India. So, this warfare and technology is simply fascinating to me, because now we have all these special ops groups, and that's what I'm going to be sharing at Branson. No names, just like, but the information. And I mean, it's staggering how much ancient technology, but they're always looking for it to either genetically super enhanced super soldiers, or weapon systems, or flying machines, aka flying saucers and Vimanas in the Hindu. So, I mean, I'm excited, Gary. And number one, thanks for coming.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I'm sure there will be a lot of great conversation there among people who gather to exchange ideas. And that's the beauty of all this. There will be people like L.A. Marzulli, a good friend of mine, a good friend of yours. L.A. is just a wealth of research accompanied by some very wise exploration. Let's put it that way. He's always, as he says, on the trail. And you and I are on the trail too. Mine is a little different. I'm more housebound than people like L.A. Marzulli, who travel to the far-flung corners of the world, but I do a lot of reading. And one thing I wanted to mention is that I plan on emphasizing that the Bible is high-tech. Please, folks, even if you read your King James Bible, and I've had the same King James Bible now for I cannot tell you how many years, it's a high-tech book. Paul writes about the prince of the power of the air, and he uses the Greek word air, which is spelled in Greek alpha epsilon rho, but it's pronounced just like we pronounce air. But the Greeks said the air is from the ground to the top of Mount Olympus, which is, roughly what, 8, 9, 10,000 feet. I'm not sure how high Olympus is, but that's the patrol zone of the prince of the power of the air, Satan. And then Paul says, you know what? He says, God is with you and will protect you. And he says, and I want to read Ephesians 3:17. He says, I pray that Christ may dwell in your hearts, and that ye, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth, length, depth, and height. And whoops, first time I ever read that, I said, wait a minute, 4 dimensions: breadth, length, depth, and height. And the fourth one, height, comes from the Greek word hupsos, which means a high place, or it can even mean the ultimate height, the heavens. And so what Paul is doing here is giving us a little hint that there is, yes, length, breadth, length, and depth, but there's also height. And then, of course, he gives us the story of how he ascended to the third heaven. And he said, I don't want to brag, but I knew a man once who went to the third heaven. Paul is talking about the dimensional, or shall we say hyperdimensional reality of heaven. And he wants us to understand that, and he wants us to be experts in it, so that when the things happen that are happening today in the world, we will not shake our heads and walk away. We will understand.
The failure of modern, I would say this, I got a new word, pulpitianity, okay, with those in the pulpit being literally terrified to talk about the Genesis 6 narrative, literally being terrified to talk about aliens, literally being more terrified about the book of Revelation. Isn't it funny, Gary, that while the Christians at large, I'm going to call claimants to Christianity, they're like more afraid of that subject, biblical prophecy, and than they are of, I guess anything else that would be the truth. Yet the world's embracing what I would call empiric reality, and the necessity of the information like that we're presenting at Branson. To my knowledge, this isn't like a UFO convention. This isn't like Comic-Con, thank the Lord. But what it is it's the cumulative experience of, I just quick and dirty calculated, 300 years at least. I mean, a lot of us are over 60. I think there's 4 presenters over 60, and there's 4 under 60. So the thing is that the cumulative knowledge, we're trying to serve our generation well and pass it on. And I'd like to commend you for the efforts you've done in your writing your books. What's your latest book?
Well, I am currently writing a book on the angels and their influence. That is to say, what does the Bible say they do in real terms? And I won't give you the title just yet. I've got to keep that one dangling, and maybe because I'm not quite sure what the title will be. But but the workings of the angels documented in modern technology, and technology going all the way back, for example, to the Book of Enoch, which mentions technology over and over and over again. We know that's a very old manuscript. Might argue about the actual source of the Book of Enoch, but it certainly talks about high tech, including, and I know you know this, but isn't it amazing that features Enoch walking up to what he calls a house, and he walks in and describes this house as being full of energy of all sorts, which he tries in his own way to describe. And then he just happens to mention that this house rose off the ground and took him on an aerial tour of the earth. And I don't know about you, but I call that, well, today it'd be called sci-fi. Actually, it's not. The fi part should just be scratched out. It's science.
It's like the same thing with the Good Night, the movie with Kurt Russell on Stargates, actually the movie Stargate. And it was a pyramid, remember this? But the pyramid itself was a spacecraft. So I think the Book of Enoch, what a lot of people don't understand, here's the thing that everyone must understand. Fallen angels were such, before they fell, they were exposed to the technology. They understood the mysteries of the universe as God revealed. I mean, the secret things of the Lord belong to God, but that which he revealed. And they use that, the fallen angels, the fallen ones, use that technology to ultimately destroy mankind, because that's their end goal. And, Jesus said if he didn't shorten the days for the elect's sake, those redeemed by his blood, there'd be no flesh left alive. And now you've got technologists that are salivating like hungry vampires, waiting to destroy the human seed to implant the seed of the serpent in a technological form and shape. And most people, like I'll be talking about, and I asked L.A. this, and you remember we were there, but I asked him, L.A., did you ever tie alien implant with artificial intelligence? Because there you have the seeming inorganic, organic, if you will, interplay. So I'm telling you, I can't stand my seat. I'm excited to hear what you have to say, Mr. Stearman.
Yeah. Well, what can we say? The fascinating thing to me is that we have arrived at the moment in history when all of this is exploding. For example, and you know this probably better than I do, but television now is beginning to feature disclosure, quote unquote. And that word disclosure is a very hot word right now. And the government is supposedly finding ways to leak out little bits and pieces of information to the public so that they won't be frightened when they discover the truth that, yes, we are being visited by visitors from outer space or from other galaxies. And that's going to be the dogma. That's going to be the propaganda. And you and I are, at least I know I am dead set against that particular reading of world history. They're not from those places at all. They're from right here on good old planet Earth. And disclosure is, I think, a setup to form a secular government to deal with what they will present as a particular kind of problem. How do we deal with our new progenitors, or how do we deal with the people who say they have returned to see mankind into a golden age? How do we deal with people like that? And that's what the government's going to be, I think, preoccupied with in days to come as disclosure grows.
Well, and
Steve, can I throw a toss in that question here?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, Mr. Stearman, how will the world religions react to this? Not just Christianity, but other religions. How? And you don't have to answer. I mean, to the extent that you'd like, but I mean, how would all of the world religions react to this disclosure? I'm just curious.
Well, just off the top of my head, in India. The predominant number of religions in India speak of flying craft that used to visit planet Earth, and there was a great war in the past, and after that they were not seen again. And these craft, which we would call UFOs, the Indians refer to as Vimanas, and I'm sure you've heard that term. And these flying vehicles, I think, will be at some point in the future said to have returned. The old ones have returned. For example, the Chinese worship the flying dragon, and the dragon is always accompanied by a fiery disc. Not many people know that, but the fiery disc is a Chinese emblem, which used to appear in the skies quite regularly, say the Chinese. And Taoism really deals with this. But imagine the dragon showing up with his flying disc in person. And so you've got the Indian, the Hindus, and 1,000 other religions over in the Far East, all looking for the old ones to return. And just to answer your question quickly, I think that they will say, wow, it's happening. It's the old ones have come back, and we're about to enter a new golden age.
All right. Well, thank you.
Sorry, Gary. I didn't mean to overtalk you.
No, I'm going to. And ultimately, what the effect? This is going to have the effect of reducing Jesus, even more than he's being reduced in the on the world stage, reducing him to an operative of the larger. Maybe I'm screwing up.
Oh yeah, you're saying right. Here's the thing: they're going to claim, the aliens already claim, and there was a group of scientists who believed this. They're very well placed, very high security clearance. But the aviary that claim that there are DROPA discs, D-R-O-P-A discs, that literally show the crucifixion of Jesus Christ and saucers in the air. Now, we know what we can do in our generation just with computer simulations. But remember that the crystals, and most people don't realize this, even the transistor, changed the history of the world but it was in the original crystal radio sets. But the groups will have collaborating evidence that even so much that if they can give you an HD or 4K version of the crucifixion of Jesus and claim they sent him, they will deceive so marvelously that Jesus said that except, he tells us that we would be deceived. It's going to be so great. So, Doug, it's going to be the greatest mind control and projection, holographic projections, and the way the brain works and stuff. By the way, Gary Cole will be talking about holonomic brain theory, which is obviously what Chuck Misser was always talking about. And the thing that's critical is that they will, how do I say this? If you're hearing that the U.S. military can hit you with a laser and put thoughts in your head and the voices of God in your head, which they tried to do with David Koresh, then understand that the technology, that what will you know as reality, will they be able to divorce even the cognitive function of the human brain and just give you nothing but imagery and program that as a real fact, and everything as biblical as just being myth and legend. They'll take myth and legends and put it as a primary truth in the universe, and take our Lord and the workings of the living God and put it as secondary, and it will be relegated to to the dustpan of history. Go ahead, Gary.
I would just like to say that there is a modern mythology. It's called science fiction. And Arthur C. Clarke, who was, by the way, a satellite theoretician, he developed all the formulas that enabled us to put communications satellites in orbit. So he's a brilliant man. He wrote a series of sci-fi novels, the first of which was called Childhood's End. And he had humanity in the latter days visited by a benevolent personage who finally inspires confidence in the leaders of planet Earth. And he agrees on a certain day he will land and get out of his ship and greet the masses, and a new golden age would be visited on planet Earth. Well, when he, and I'll give away the secret here, the last chapter, when the ship lands and the new overlord gets out of the ship, guess what? He has leathery skin, he has fangs, pointy ears, horns, and a forked tail. But he's a wonderful man. And that's the end of the story.
Just describe my mother-in-law.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can immediately relate to that description. But here's the deal, and that was before the Underwood deviled ham, caricature of the devil was placed on their marketing thing. And I think that's really important, because the lying signs and wonders, and this is something I tell people about the two witnesses, Gary, God isn't just going to leave Satan incarnate and the false prophet on the earth and then allow, his creation just to go, well, what does this mean? God will have his two witnesses to be able to challenge. And, the point being is, if it's Elijah and Enoch, which I believe, if it's Moses, and Moses be the only guy in history to die twice, obviously the angels buried him. So if you're going to have the most supernatural war games, and let's call it war games, because in some people's mind, war is a game. In my mind, it's the eternal destiny of billions of people's souls. But if you're going to be challenging, they're going to be deceiving on a level that's been unparalleled in history. Jesus said there's never been a time like it, nor would be again. And so then it only stands to reason, if you've got Satan coming down, inhabiting the Antichrist in place of Jesus Christ, that there would be two powerful witnesses. By the way, they've been in heaven. They know what's going on. They don't have to read the headlines on the internet. The point is that they're going to come and challenge supernaturally. So in that realm, we have, in essence, the biggest supernatural battlefield that's playing out. And already, you call it in the mythology, your definition of sci-fi is perfect, because it is laying the mythological base. Just like there was an Outer Limits that showed a flying saucer, and it was kind of like a gray alien. I don't know if you remember that, but his body fluids were literally powering the craft. And they got the craft, the alien died, but they couldn't power the craft because his body fluids weren't, that was somehow the power. Well, there's instances where they found that in modern history. So I don't know the episode, but it's an Outer Limits episode. So as you are now watching the unveiling, and let's say this, not so much disclosure, I would use the word satanic enclosure. In other words, God gave us his wonderful creation. The heavens declare the glory of God, the earth shows forth his firmament, or his handiwork. The thing is that now you've got all this stuff converging. And Doug, you said a powerful word. I posted an article today, and Dave Daubermeyer is to be commended about what happened to the name of Jesus. Jesus is being criminalized while the criminals are being sanctified. And I don't mean biblical sanctification. I mean the exalted ones. Maybe there's a better word. Your thoughts on that?
The idea of standing up against Jesus with the force of the state, I think goes all the way back to the Roman Empire and Pontius Pilate. That incredible narrative that culminates in the crucifixion of Christ. I think you can replay that in the latter days, and there will be a modern day Pontius Pilate standing up, probably in the very near future. Perhaps there are a few candidates out there right now standing up against Jesus. You and I know that he is the creator of the heavens and the earth. He has more high-tech solutions in his little finger than we can imagine in a lifetime. And he is, what can I say? He is the answer to the problem of the invasion of planet Earth that's taking place right now. Just one quick thought, and one of the things I'm going to share at the meeting is the story about an individual that I knew very, very well, who designed the Intercontinental Ballistic System alarm network. And he was a brilliant electronics engineer. And he confided in me at one point that he said, Gary, you know what our biggest problem was in designing the ICBM alarm trigger system? He said it was constantly being falsely triggered by overflying UFOs, and we had to do some very clever designing to design this thing so that it would not be falsely tripped by UFOs, which I think is a fascinating story. The UFOs have or incorporate a kind of technology that interposes itself with the technology of humankind at the present level in some ways. And that's a very interesting story. And by the way, if I could quickly just add, one of the things I'm going to share, and for years and years and years, I didn't say a word about this, not to anyone. But I'm going to share the story about how I flew in formation for quite a length of time with the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It was a disc-shaped UFO. And there's a very, very long and I think a biblically sound narrative that goes with this.
Well, you're the only guy I know that's TWA. Gary Stearman, the original TWA, Traveling with Angels. The thing is, and see, this is the issue that most people can't separate. If fallen angels, and I want to go back, I'm talking even prior to the destruction of the earth, in Genesis 1:1-1-2, tohu and bohu, without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the earth. Prior to that, Jeremiah's flood, Jeremiah 4. The thing that's important I think that's really critical is for people to understand that time as we humans process it is not the ultimate word on eternity. A good example, the angel says in the mystery of time will be no more. And how we process imagery through our human brain, how we see movement, motion. And again, this is all something that I believe God's going to give us a greater understanding. The question is, Lord, I always say this, how can I, a finite being, even begin to embrace the infinite majesty of you? And the answer is simple. Only as he allows it, directs it, and increases capability. It's like, who was it? One of the guy, George Washington Carver, something asked God to show him the mystery of the universe. And God said, I'll show you the mystery of the peanut. And the peanut, and that's what I'm trying to say, despise not the day of small beginnings. So in the technology realm and the Book of Enoch, people fight that too. I'm told there were 360 books of Enoch by Spec Ops, Black Ops guys, and that one of the things that is really critical is that we only have fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Also, the Book of Giants. Hardly anyone ever mentions the Book of Giants that were found in Qumran too, which lays out the detail. Somebody says, why are you always talking about giants? Well, the Rephaim, okay, the megalithic structures, the technology. These guys weren't Shrek in a cave with a club. And that's the thing that really perplexes me, is to how to communicate ancient technology. And I think having you at Branson I wish I could give you 8 hours, or actually, what we'll do, we'll kick everybody out and then we'll just sit down, mics, and talk back and forth. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I'm glad you're kidding. I don't know whether I could go 8 hours.
Yeah, I don't think I can anymore either, but go ahead and share now, Gary. Doug, how long do we have? Because I want to give Gary the maximum amount of time on this interview.
12 minutes, sir.
Okay, go ahead and go for it. Anything you want to share. Don't need to throw it back to me unless you need to, or Doug breaks in, because this is about you.
Well, actually, it's not about me. It's about the phenomenon. And honestly, if there were any other way to share this without standing up in public, I probably would find a way to do it, because think about it in this way. You and I and many, many others are sort of on the cutting edge of talking about something that, is suspect. And there are a lot of churches that don't want to hear what we're talking about. And they would rather stay with a simple, formulaic approach to salvation and so forth. And God bless them. I believe in the saving blood of the Lord Jesus Christ. However, I believe the Christians ought to be the smartest people on planet Earth, because they've got the book. We have the Holy Spirit, and we have the ability to understand what's written there. And when you compare that to what's going on, we understand it all. We understand places where demons thrive. We understand UFOs. We understand the plan of Satan. We understand that we are building to a climactic latter-day invasion of angels of the fallen kind. And when we begin to understand all this, we can glorify the Lord in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do before. And this is the thing that I want to transmit to other people. This is the burning message in my heart, because the little secrets that I've heard all my life all go together to say that there is an immense plan underway. It's a high-tech plan to bring about the people of God to a wonderful new world that the fallen ones could only dream about creating. They rebelled against God, and they tried to build a wonderful world, and they failed at every turn. And they're back again. They're trying to repeat what they did before, I think, the flood of Noah, and they're trying to repeat what they tried again for the second time at the Tower of Babel. In the days of Nimrod, they won't give up. They just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And if we can present the story that way, our military-industrial complex, the global military-industrial complex, is wrestling not against principalities or against the power of earthly beings, but against principalities, namely heavenly powers. And if you phase or stage the next wars or series of wars on that premise, suddenly you're going to be able to understand what the Bible says about what's coming.
Doug?
Go ahead.
I don't know. I mean, where can I go from here? Except I have, I think I have a number of proofs. I think I have proofs based upon my own observation and interaction with people whose observations corroborate my own personal ones, and I'd just like to share those.
And Steve and Mr. Sturman, it's my belief that when I look back and I look at the different conferences and different events and and everything that's going on. I look at Steve, I think you mentioned this earlier. I think it was pretty profound, the timing of the release of the information. And right now, I think we're at this cusp where you turn to Drudge, you turn to other news aggregate sites, and you can see this disclosure coming about. So the timing of all of this, and even more importantly with respect to Branson, the individuals like Mr. Stearman coming on to explain not just to bracket the historical with the current and give us insight into the future, what we can expect. So the bottom line, and this is why I like having these periods of time, and I'll get emails saying, "Oh, you just want to sell tickets." Well, yeah, of course, but even more importantly, it's the information that is so necessary out there to avoid this strong delusion and deception. And then once people know this, I mean, the more armed, as we're armed with knowledge, and Gary Stearman being the keynote speaker, given his experiences, knowledge, and background, I can't think of a better way to invest your time, your money, your focus than this. So that's why I just want to kind of put this in perspective. This is about saving souls and not allowing our children and their children, perhaps. Look, I don't know what now. I mean, that's what this is about.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to interject one thought here, and that is, I have read science fiction all my life. As I got older, I kind of gave it up because it became less and less exciting. The Bible became more and more exciting. But we live in a sci-fi culture. Video games, the Avengers, all the Marvel crowd, all those supernatural guys, Superwoman, Superman, super this, super that. And we have now a whole generation on planet Earth who wear the little Superman T-shirts, the Superwoman T-shirts. They have little pins on their little T-shirts that shows a slanty-eyed, almond-eyed green guy. And they're worshiping this whole construct of the ancient ones come back to fix things on planet Earth. And there's also, if you've noticed on any of the late sci-fi movies, they always are staged on an apocalyptic theme. Well, the word apocalypse is a biblical word. And these kids are being taught through sci-fi to expect an apocalypse, and the heroes of the apocalypse are going to be the ones that we call devils, demons, and the devil himself. And if that isn't cause for Christians to rally and get out there and tell the truth, I don't know what is.
Amen to that. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I want to say. In the Bible, God says his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Not because, and it doesn't say it in these words, his people are destroyed of lack of knowledge, and because they reject the knowledge. And so in rejecting that which God is trying to warn, it's like telling somebody there's a minefield out there and, turning somebody loose. I used to say this, it's like being a one-eyed man. I'm not making fun of anybody that's lost an eye, on a pogo stick, bouncing around, not knowing how to read the sign and going, I don't see any mines. Of course he doesn't see any mines. They're hidden. But the minute he touches it, it's eternity. I'm serious. So that's the caricature I get in my mind. This is different. This is why Branson, it's just like our transhumanism and hybrid age conference last year in September was so critical. AI fills the headlines. Transport and transfer to outer space is filling the headlines. The richest 3 guys in the world are headed to the stars. The interesting, I say this phenomenon is, while they're headed to the stars, the star people, as the Navajo call them, are headed back to Earth. And isn't it interesting, Gary? Everything they had in heaven, I'm talking now specifically the angels who fell, they left their, first estate, come here, and they couldn't achieve what they thought they could achieve apart from mankind. So now they seduce mankind to cooperate using God's original authority given to the descendants of Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve, they forfeited that in the garden. But now they're trying to utilize, I would say this, they're trying to get the collective whatever gifts and graces of everybody that goes after the evil one to bring together to somehow feel that will attenuate or fuel their new man, their new Uberman, their new super.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that, ladies and gentlemen, that's why this stuff is important. And Gary, I'm excited. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing the cumulative knowledge that you've given us.
It's been my pleasure, Steve. I'm looking forward to it, and we have a mission. I think you and I agree on what that mission is, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you to Bob Ulrich, too. Tell Bob thank you very much.
I'll say hi to Bob.
Thank you.
And that goes for we here, Eric the Tech, and myself at the Hagmann Report. And Mr. Stearman, thank you so very much for your gracious gift of time this evening. Steve, I want to thank you, too, for your gracious gift of time. And we've got about a minute left, Steve. If there's anything that you want to plug in right now, it's
Sure.
to you.
I think it's important to, I've been putting alerts up from a scientist on the Earth changes and the severe Earth changes that are taking place and NASA's flights. Well, immediately people are now calling all those NASA flights conspiracy. Well, I would say this, it's not conspiracy when they are literally flying over the San Andreas Fault. I want everyone to go to my alert section on stevequayle.com because I talked to the man last night in his hospital room on Skype. He's out of the country and he's beat up. But the point is that he happened to be the developer of some of the sensing units that they're using. And I'm telling people that you've got to understand the Earth is going to reel to and fro like a drunkard, and millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives, not just in the United States, are at stake. Just like the story today, NASA came out and claimed it's not man causing global warming, but changes. He made a statement, and I can't document it, but he said, right now, the magnetosphere has collapsed 25%. He said, Steve, I'm the guy that designed the formula to test that stuff. So there are men, and he happens to be my age too, and the deal is that, so this isn't a young kid, and he chose to live out of the country because he could not continue his research because the people in the world of the intelligence community did not want it made public. So ladies and gentlemen, anything that's truth will ultimately be immediately branded as conspiracy theory. I have a good friend, Colin, who sent me an email, Doug, saying that NASA plane, he lives in the Central Valley, California, flew 100 feet, Gary, above ground level. And that's moving, 100 feet AGL. They had to bring it down, evidently, for their instruments. It has limitation to be able to see under the Earth. Go to my alerts. It's that important.
And gentlemen, we're out of time. I just want to say thank you both. Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com, Gary Stearman, prophecywatchers.com as well. Thank you. Thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you both in Missouri. And folks, the information to that event will be in the program description box at HagmannReportLive.com. May God bless each and every one of you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.